Hi, this is Max Haag, and in this video you will get an answer to flow Pareto. How to get 80% of flow with only 20% of the work. How to find the sweet spot on your challenge skill ratio and more advanced answers on flow. I interviewed Stephen Kotler, one of the most interesting people in flow and peak performance. I skipped the easy questions that you find in other interviews and got right to the juicy advanced stuff about flow. So without further ado, enjoy. Stephen Kotler is a New York Times bestselling author, award-winning journalist, and co-founder and director of research for the Flow Genome project. He works with Google, the Navy SEALs, Red Bulls, and other high performance to research flow states and peak performance. His books include the non-fiction works Bold, How to Go Big, Create Wealth and Impact the World, The Rise of Superman, Decoding the Science of Ultimate Human Performance, and Stealing Fire, How Silicon Valley, the Navy SEALs, and Maverick scientists are revolutionizing the way we live and work. Together with his wife, Joy Nicholson, he co-founded the Rancho de Chihuahua Dog Sanctuary in New Mexico, and he made his first money working as a magician at the age of 10. Welcome, Stephen Kotler.
You have done your homework.
Great to have you here, Stephen.
Nice to be with you, Max.
I give you a short introduction of why the fuck I'm doing this, and it all started with your book. A good friend of mine recommended me Stealing Fire at, I think, in March or April this year. And I got the audio version first, which is awesome, by the way. And I walk here in the park next to the river and I listened to it, and I could listen to it for hours because I felt so excited hearing this. And suddenly, while I was hearing this audiobook, I had this epiphany. I was like, oh, that's what I've been doing for the past 6-7 years in my life. I've been seeking flow, and that's why I'm so excited about it. And I started the Flow Meetup, and I started this YouTube channel. So I was wondering, what was your intention in writing Stealing Fire?
Well, there's a lot. Stealing Fire is the culmination, both for myself and Jamie Wheal, who my great partner in the Flow Genome project, who I wrote the book with, and it's the culmination of 30 years of work in the world. That said, you're what we were aiming at, right? When I wrote The Rise of Superman, which was my kind of first book on flow, was not my idea. You know what I mean? I put together a bunch of the neuroscience and a bunch of the science at once, but what I was trying to do was standardize a language so people could have the conversations out loud. Give it a scientific foundation. Say, hey, this experience that a lot of people are having, it's got a language, it's got a terminology. We understand some of the biology, right? There's still holes in the research you could drive a bus through, but we're farther than we've ever been before. And I felt on a certain level, I felt like I had taken the question, as far as I could possibly. I had tons of questions. All I wanted to do was put it out in the world and let other smart people think about it and talk about it. And I wanted you. But when we started the Flow Genome project, we had a partner, Laura, who used to say, "We know we're going to be successful when we have events and Steven's not bored." And on a certain level, right? She's not wrong, right? And Stealing Fire was more the same, but on a bigger level, because in the gap between Rise of Superman and Stealing Fire, Jamie and I had the privilege really to really see everything that was going on at the cutting edge of high performance. Right, I'd spent my whole career, 30 years, investigating what does it take to do the impossible. Right, an obsession, by the way, I got when I was 10 years old and first learned magic. Right, because first time I saw somebody make a sponge ball disappear, it was my baby brother. Right, and two things were really clear to me. One was, holy crap, that ball was gone. Right, and two, holy crap, my brother isn't magic. So I'm looking at this impossible thing, and I know there's a skill and a process underneath it. And from that point on, I was obsessed. What is the skill? What does it take to do the impossible? And in the gap between Rise of Superman and Stealing Fire, the techniques people using altered states of consciousness, right? Flow is one, but to tackle those kinds of challenges went from this countercultural subversive idea to everywhere in the world and fueling a $4 trillion economy, which is, it's 1/16 of the global economy is being driven forward by this stuff. That was shocking to us. And, what we wanted to do was put it out there and say, look, man, this is happening. This is, and there's a language for it, and we don't have to bury it under weird mystical new age term. Like, there's biology here. Yes, there's still mysteries. There's a whole ton of stuff we can't yet explain. We think it's because the measurement technology has yet to be invented. Maybe there's some other cosmic reason. Cool, open to that too. I'm not that smart that I can tell, right? But that's it. This is exciting. This is amazing. Just to kind of put it in context, when I started investigating the neuroscience of so-called mystical experiences, right? This was even before flow. I started looking at my second book, West of Jesus. I met Dr. Andrew Newberg, who was then at the University of Pennsylvania, and he had just done the very first brain imaging scans of Tibetan Buddhists and Franciscan nuns feeling oneness with everything, right? And I had just completed all this research with surfers, and surfers kept talking about, and I'd had the experience as a surfer of I'm out in the waves and I become one with the ocean. And nobody, they would talk to me about it, but they wouldn't even talk to their friends about it, right? This was this weird thing that happened to surfers, and they think we're weird as it is. We can't let this out, right? They think we're really crazy. And suddenly, Andy had figured out, well, wait a minute, there's biology underneath this. We know why we feel one with everything. It turns out this portion of the brain turns off and we can no longer separate self from other, and oh my God, there's biology there. And it was the first mystical experience. And I remember talking about it with him. We were talking about, how far do you think we're going to get in our lifetime in this? And we both were convinced it wasn't going to be very far. And it's 20 years later, and pretty much every mystical experience you can possibly think of, near-death experiences, speaking in tongues, trance states, on and on and on, Haitian voodoo stuff, take your pick. We looked under the hood of them. There are still things we can't explain, but by and large, we have found really interesting biology underneath this stuff. That's a revolution. Everybody should know about this.
Yeah. Awesome. So a question that came up at our Flow meetup here in Düsseldorf is people want to be very efficient these days. So they ask, can you apply the Pareto principle to flow? What are the 20% of things to do to get 80% of flow? If that's possible, and to be more specific, if you need it, for someone who's working in a white-collar job, sitting in front of a computer most of the day and punching stuff into the keyboard.
So there's two totally different answers to this. It's a great question. And of course it came up at the meetup. It makes sense. And I'm going to give you the heavy no, and then I'm going to give you the softer yes. But the heavy no is this: shut the fuck up. Are you kidding me? It's like people coming up to me, what are the 3 things I can do Monday morning? Shut the fuck up. This is what I know for sure. You get one shot at this life. You're going to spend a third of it asleep. So what you do with the other 2/3, that's the ball. It may be the only ball game in history, period, for you, right? So forget about the 3 things you can do Monday morning, the 82. This is optimal performance. This is the biology of high performance. This is what we're wired for. So if you are really happy being mediocre, then I am more than happy to give you 3 things you can do on Monday morning, and you can just start doing them. If that's what you want out of this world, great, fantastic. But I'm really not interested. The people I'm interested in working with are going to fight every moment of every day to put everything they possibly have into the day. I want to, at the end of the day, I want to collapse into bed because I have nothing left. I've spent it all on my day. And I want to do the same thing the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And those are the people I'm interested in. That said, that's the hard answer, right? That's me being an asshole. Here's the other answer, which is, the funny thing about flow hacking is, and this is some of the work we've been involved in at the Flow Genome Project, that they've done some fantastic work on this stuff at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden and elsewhere, which is over the past 15 years, we've identified that flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow, right? There are 20 of them in total, as you probably know. And, not everybody is going to be susceptible to everyone, right? That's why we have the flow profile on the Flow Genome Project website, that diagnostic. But what our research has showed, what our training at Google has showed, what the surveys and the studies we've run around flow fundamentals, our training course, which is built around these triggers and whatnot, it shows that this stuff is unbelievably trainable. We're seeing on average in flow fundamentals, for example, a 70% bump in 7 different correlates for flow. 7 different metrics, each jumping on average 70%. This is 900 people have taken this surveys, on both ends. So it's a decent sized data set. It's not fantastic, but it's a decent sized data set. And it's not because our Kung Fu is so great. I mean, I think our Kung Fu is fantastic, but whatever. It's that this stuff is really easy to train. And it's really easy to train because we're all hardwired for it, right? This is how we perform this way. And so, I mean, first things first, and this is the first thing, when I work with organizations, the first thing I do is I say, look, if you can't hang a sign in your door that says, fuck off, I'm flowing, you're sunk, right? This is uninterrupted concentration. The research is really clear that 90 to 120 minute blocks of uninterrupted concentration maximize focus, maximize flow. So if you work for a company, run a company, or treat your own life with this much disrespect that you try to answer messages in 15 minutes and emails in an hour, and you have your alerts set up on your computer so focus, okay, well, you're just being idiotic, right? Like, the research is really clear on this, and it's not that hard. We need uninterrupted focus to be at our best. Okay, that's, so for 80-20ing anything, well, that's got to be the very first thing we do is, you got to build your life around flow. And the best way to do it is to say, the hardest thing I got to do today, whatever it is, I'm going to spend 90 to 120 minutes on it. I'm going to block out all distractions, right? I mean, this stuff isn't super sexy, right? It's really stupid simple. And most high performers will go in the same direction naturally, right? Peak performers are going to have 90 to 120 minutes blocked out in their schedule anyways. They're going to move in that direction naturally because we're wired for it. So, that's, a simple one. The challenge skills ratio. Csikszentmihalyi called it the golden rule of flow, right? Make sure you're pushing all the time, just a little bit, so you're at the edge of your challenge threshold, right? That's where we perform our best. So you want to be as close to that sweet spot all the time as possible. And I think the third thing that if I was going to 80-20 this, so I'm just, right, these are just, what would I focus on, right? I would focus on uninterrupted concentration. I would make sure I pushed myself hard enough. I trained that grit muscle, that lean in muscle, right, to always stay at that. And that also will train up risk taking, which is another flow trigger. So you get a stack. You're not just training one variable at once. And the same thing to kind of abet this process is, and there are lots of different tools for it. I personally like reframing, but you got to learn to train down fear, right? You got to develop, because norepinephrine and cortisol, which sit underneath fear, block learning. They block flow. A little bit is great. Too much, and you're so right. That's what the challenge skills sweet spot is, right? So while you're working the challenge skills sweet spot, you also have to be training down your reaction to fear. So whether it's, breath work, physical activity, take your pick. I use all of them because I'm crazy and neurotic. So my daily fear load is, off the charts, and it's a great motivator, but it's also like I'm always doing that. So to me, if I was going to 80-20 in this principle, and I wasn't giving you my asshole answer, those are the 3 things I would focus on. And if I was going to add a 4th in, it would be make sure you're getting enough sleep at night.
Awesome. Yeah, I saw Jamie posted something on Facebook, like master the basics. That was a pretty cool, like how to live healthy. And he said also it's so important. And about the challenge skill ratio, I think it was like plus 4%, right? Or something. How do you find the sweet spot there when you're like working in front of a computer?
Okay, so that's a great answer. And that, let's clarify the plus 4% because you brought it up. This was, so Csikszentmihalyi, godfather of flow psychology, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and a Google mathematician sat down. And they were trying to figure out, could we come up with, and somehow, and I have no idea how, I need to ask Mike, they came up with 4%. And we said, well, that's interesting. Let's try to test it. And we devised a whole bunch of semi-crazy, weird little way. Like, I'll give you an example. I took a bunch of mountain bikers and we mapped out in a downhill mountain bike park, we mapped out everything we could do and the heights and the gaps between jumps and things like that. So you could actually measure. You can go, okay, I can clear a 12-foot gap jump, no problem. I get nervous at 16 feet and I won't go over, 16 feet is my maximum, right? So somewhere in between, right? And then you can start measuring. We started doing those sorts of things. And then Austin Eichhorn, another guy we work with, started using it. He trains professional athletes, and he was measuring tons of metrics, and he took it, and a bunch of other people did that. And turns out we're all finding that 4% works really, really well. In fact, I found that when applied to action sports, I did not plateau. I kept getting into flow state after flow state after flow state. Like, it really, instead of like a couple big flow states a season and a long plateau, I would really move. What does 4% feel like at a computer is an interesting question. And I mean, let me, I could turn it back on you. You've been applying this stuff at your computer, right? So let's start there. What does 4% feel like to you, Max?
Yeah, that's hard. I would say, for example, doing this interview now.
Okay.
It's the plus 4%.
You're a little bit outside your comfort zone, but you're not totally overwhelmed, right?
Yeah.
It's exactly right. It's what it usually feels like for most people. Feels like that to me. So let me give you an example as a writer. And this isn't always the case because I write nonfiction, but if I'm writing fiction or writing anything that has to do with me at all, where there's a reveal going on, I have found that 4% is the point at which I feel vulnerable, where I feel like I've showed the reader just a little too much of me, and like it could come back and hurt me. Like that spot, I'm not totally exposed, but I'm vulnerable. That to me is the level of truth telling that I know equates with A, pushing 4%, and B, actually getting the best response in readers. So it's something you got to train and learn over time, right? And there are certain activities are really useful for it because they come weightlifting, built-in measurement, running, built-in measurement, rock climbing at an indoor climbing gym or even an out sport climbing facility where everything is rated, right? Skiing, beginner, intermediate, advanced, right? Like where you have a rating system that's been pre-established for you. Well, that's a great way to sort of go into that situation. And then, by the way, you get that 4%, how it makes you feel. Let's say like 4% skiing feels a certain way on the inside, right? That same feeling is going to map onto your writing, is going to map onto your computer, right? What you're trying to do with a lot of this stuff, I think, is you may have heard us talk about the somatic address, right? The somatic address, how does it make me feel? What's the phenomenology of the sensation? That is often what your guide is. You have to find how it makes you feel, and then you steer by that. You're going back towards that feeling. And, we're really good at neurofeedback and biofeedback, right? Like we train really easily on that stuff. You can find a feeling again. I always tell people one of the most powerful things you can do flow-wise is if you had a deep flow state during the day, as you're falling asleep, try to remember it. Like replay the activity, and you want to keep going, right, until you can get the feeling. You want to lock onto that feeling, and one of the reasons is to lock onto that feeling, you're producing neurochemicals, right? And neurochemicals, if you really want to lay down learning and patterns in the brain quickly, you want neurochemicals. They're much more powerful than neuroelectrical signals in terms of rewiring the brain, right? They're bigger levers. The guy who taught me neuroscience first was a guy named Dr. Robert White. He was one of the great kind of neurosurgeons of the 20th century. And he said, if you really want to understand the brain, understand, neurochemistry, because it's hard to get a big neurochemical reaction. It's like a first principle. In Bold, in Abundance, we talk about first principle thinking, Elon Musk and, right, all that kind of stuff. I often think of neurochemicals as first principles for the brain, like the amygdala response, pattern recognition, big neurochemical. Those things are really big drivers in the brain, so you can sort of use them as first principle thinking. Any of that makes sense?
Yeah, awesome. I heard in another interview that you get up around 3:30, 4 a.m. in the morning. And I was wondering, is it better because you said like you like to work within 4 minutes of waking up, if I got that right. And I was wondering if it's like better to get out of bed, turn the computer on and write, versus doing a meditation and Qi Gong session for like half an hour and then start working.
So I think pretty much every other high performance expert in the world says do the meditation, the Qi Gong, right? They say do that first. And all I can say is, and you'll hear this, both Jamie and myself at the Flow Genome Project say this all the time, like you have to conduct your own experiment, right? I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning for a number of reasons. I produce a lot of norepinephrine, right? Like that's why I have so much fear and neuroticism, but it's also my brain is really fast and there's a lot of curiosity and right, like and a lot of excitement and intensity. Like good side, bad side, kryptonite, superpower are always the same. I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning because my racing brain gets me up. And rather than trying to fight myself, I go with it, right? Why do I try to start writing 4 minutes? Because I wake up, I'm a creative. So the first thing I do every day is I work on whatever book I'm writing, right? And when you wake up, you're coming out of theta waves. You're passing through alpha on your way to beta, which is, hey, I'm awake and alert, right? But flow is back down there on the borderline between alpha and theta. So I don't want my brain to start working at all, right? I have I just do it by automatic. I've just programmed the habit machinery, and I try to be at my desk before, I'm thinking about anything. I want to stay as close to alpha at least, right? Because I'm only going to have to work harder to get back there. So that's me. I produce a lot of norepinephrine. Other people, by the way, may be in different. Like if you're in your sales, any kind of other job where it's not your job to be creative first, I would probably opt for your choice, right? Start with the meditation and the exercise, that kind of thing, and. Certainly when I travel, right, when I'm on the road speaking, I roll out of bed and I'm at the hotel gym within 4 minutes. So I'm working out before my brain has time to wake up and go, man, you're going to lift weights now? Don't you know it's 4 o'clock in the morning? What the hell's wrong with you? Right? Like, nice. Again, I'll do one of the two.
Yeah, awesome. And do you wake up 365 days a year this early? Like even like on New Year's Eve and weekend.
If I could change it,
how do you do that?
If I could change it, I would. You're looking at me like I'm getting up early because it's some kind of superpower. I'm telling you I'm getting up early because I'm Meshuggah, right? It's like, yes, it's really great. The other thing I have to tell you is I am not particularly interested in having much of a social life. Like that's not, like I don't prioritize that. I have really good friends and I see them and we spend really high quality time together. I love my wife. I spend really great quality. But I always say, if I'm going to know you at all, we're either going to work together or we're going to hurl ourselves down mountains at high speeds. Because other than that, like I'm uninterested, right? I understand very, very clearly what it is in this world that makes me feel most alive. And I do those things, and I don't waste my time with other things, right? If I'm going to bother to go to a party, it's going to be one party out of I'm going to say no for 6 months straight, and I'm going to choose the one event, right? Like I don't waste it. I would much rather go to bed really early, wake up, and be able to put it into my books than spend it on an evening. And by the way, I wasn't always this way, right? I have one of the reasons I get to be this way is I was a bartender through college and through grads. You know what I mean? Like I lived at the center of a very exciting cosmopolitan city, you know what I mean, world for a lot of time. And, on top of which I was a journalist. So I, got to go on tour with rock bands and, I got to be behind a lot of curtains and have a lot more fun than most people. So I think my tank is full. Like I sort of had 10 lifetimes worth of fun in my, in my 20s. So I'm cool. I'm good.
Awesome.
I also get up at 5:30, but I can get it like 6 days a week, but like one day I can't make it that early.
Yeah, I think the more important thing is some people are night owls, right? My wife is a night owl. Her brain doesn't turn on till 11 o'clock at night kind of thing. So the first thing is you got to figure out, like, what are you wired for naturally? Like, when does your brain naturally focus the best and augment that, right? It's a flow game. My brain works the best when it's dark outside and it's 4 a.m. and I've had a full night's sleep going into it. Like, that's when I'm at my best.
Yeah, so like you mentioned before, like people should like experiment for themselves, like what's working for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we always say at the Flow Genome Project, conduct your own experiment, right? It's one of our mottos. And it's not just, I mean, that's what the data shows over and over and over, right? Like that's 40 to 60% of whatever we are high performance wise is genetically modeled, right? Like that's what we know now. Now, epigenetics is showing a lot more of that stuff is more mutable than we thought, but we don't really understand mechanism. So, you know, what we know is that 40% of us is sort of locked in at birth by our genetics one way or another. And you got to figure out.
So you mean like if you can wake up early, or if you're
I mean like this is coded physiology. It's not like you're not a bad person if you don't work best at 4 o'clock in the morning. You have different genes and different physiology, right? You're a bad person if you don't figure out when you focus the best and where you're hardwired for and use that time wisely, right? Like the universe has given you a gift. It said, hey man, you're at your best in these hours. And if you don't do the work to figure out what that is and to maximize those hours, you're an idiot. I mean, I'm sorry, but you know.
You released an online course called Get Into Your Creative Flow on Creative Life. And inside that course, you talk about the flow cycle with the struggle, the release, the flow, and the recovery phase. And I was wondering, when I want to get in flow, do I always have to get through the struggle and release phase to get in flow? Or is there like a hack, like 4 minutes after waking up and I'm immediately into flow?
Yes and no. No, there's no, I mean, the flow cycle, it's biology, right? You can't, you can sort of play with it and amplify it in ways I'll talk about in half a second, but the core answer is no. You have to move through all 4 phases of the cycle as far as we can tell. That said, what we have seen in a lot of the work we do at the Flow Genome Project, right, there are ways to struggle more gracefully, for sure. But we call it struggle because flow is what happens when we've learned a whole bunch of skills consciously. We've automatized, right? We've chunked them, we've learned them, we've turned them into chunks, we've passed those chunks over to the adaptive unconscious, and the unconscious can execute those programs very quickly without conscious intervention. Flow is what happens when 4 or 5 of those chunks come together at once, right? We're using all of our new skills at once at a higher level. You're still going to do skill acquisition on the front end of a flow state, right? You're still going to always overload your working memory because it's limited, and that's what happens. We overload the working memory, we burn out, the conscious mind chews on it for a while, it passes it over to the subconscious, chews on it, right? Do that enough times, and you've laid down some learning and a skill. And then flow can start to amplify those things. You can 80-20 some of those processes, right? Tim Ferriss has done a phenomenal job with saying, hey man, you can learn these skills. Instead of all these skills, you can learn these skills. But Tim's also lying to you, right? I mean, Tim is absolutely right about everything he's saying, and you can do it. But, you know, one of the things I always say in journalism, and I was talking about this on Monday in the Mind, on Monday, which is the Facebook Live I do every Monday, I really believe in surrounding your craft and knowing how to do everything, right? I was talking about all the different ways I've had to learn to write, and there's 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100, 1,000 different ways I've had to learn to write, and I've had to become great or try to be great at all of them. Right? There's no 80-20ing, you know, your core craft. It doesn't, like, the better I get, right? There's and huge flow consequences too for that kind of stuff. Like as a writer, if I 80-20'd writing, so I never exactly learned how to write marketing copy, or I never learned how to write like really clear dramatic prose or whatever. When I'm working on something and I need to write marketing copy or dramatic and I reach for that tool and I don't have it, it's going to kick me out of flow. If I was in flow, I'm going to get kicked out of flow, because here's the thing I don't know how to do, right? If I don't know how to do it, it's going to push me out of that challenge skills sweet spot again, right? So yes, 80-20 is a great way to approach learning. There's lots of, there's lots of ways to amplify learning and to learn faster and better and all those things. But you still, nobody can do your push-ups for you, as my partner Jamie Wheal loves to say, right?
Okay. Thank you so much for the interview. That was awesome.
You're totally welcome, man. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the support from Germany. We
Yeah,
appreciate
your
it.
book is coming out, I think, in March, right? Stealing Fire.
Is that when it's I don't know the release date.
I saw it on Amazon Germany.
I'm excited. We've got I think we just came out. The Korea book just launched. China just launched. There's a gap. Usually it's a couple of years. People must have been really hot for this book because the translators got through it fast. Either that or they're using AI programs now to help them translate, or maybe both. I don't know what it is, but I
will check it out and tell you if it was done by Google Translate.
Google Translate? You want to laugh? I don't know where it is. I could show it to you. So my first book is called The Angle Quickest for Flight. It was a novel. And it was the first foreign language I was ever translated into was Cyrillic, right? And so it was in Russian, which I thought was appropriate because I'm Russian. So I thought that was great. But I don't speak Russian. But the first line of my book that I wrote in English is like 14 words long. And in Russian, it's like a page and a half. And I don't know what it says. I have no idea what it says. But I'm pretty sure it's not a good translation. Anyways, thanks for having me, Max.
Max here. I hope you enjoyed the interview as much as I did. If you want to see more interviews with flow and peak performance experts, give the video a thumbs up and hit subscribe.